Once again, good morning. Welcome to the Green Economy Forum organized by Eurocham. This is going to be a conversation on climate and transition finance. Let me introduce the distinguished panelists today. Jason Yang is Chief Sustainability Officer and Country Head of Transformation UOB Vietnam. Let's go with an applause so that we can warm up a little bit this morning. Mr. Luong Quan Huy, Director of GHG Emission Reduction and Ozone Layer Protection, Department of Climate Change, Monre. Thank you. Sunita Luko, Head of Southeast Asia and Pacific, European Investment Bank. Ketut Aryadi Kusuma, Senior Financial Sector Specialist at the World Bank. Thank you. Xuan Nguyen Xuan Mai, Chief Operation Officer, Conservation Vietnam. Good morning. And finally, Dennis Canet, Cluster Coordination for Sustainable Economic Development, GIZ. And me, Jando Zappia, I work for NL, and I am honored to be the moderator today. Let's right dive in. And this is going to be interactive. We're going to have a first round of questions and then more loose conversation among ourselves when you will be invited to intervene. So the Asia and the Pacific is a very crucial region for global efforts to curb climate change. It contributes around 50% of the global greenhouse gas emissions and of the total. And many countries in the region are vulnerable to the adverse impact of climate change. I would start with you, Jason. I would ask, drawing from your regional experiences, how can financial institutions help catalyze sustainable finance? What are some of your thoughts around helping to transition some of the hard-to-abate sectors, such as steel manufacturing or oil and gas?
Right, thank you, Zando. And in fact, a couple of days ago, UOB just released our net zero progress report. And I think this question comes in really timely for us as well to share about our regional experience. I think when we reflect back on our journey back in 2021, that's how we started our sustainability journey as a bank. First of all, I think as we operate across ASEAN as a region, it's important for us to reflect upon what is the targets, what are the priorities and objectives for each of the jurisdiction that we are operating in, right? The very first thing to recognize is how do we then come up with frameworks, how do we come up with solutions to enable our clients in each of the jurisdiction and the regulatory bodies to succeed in their net zero targets. All right, so that is the very, very first part that we need to recognize. Whether it is to support in terms of the green transportation, all right, whether like similarly for Vietnam, whether it's in terms of energy security, whether it's wind energy, whether it's in solar farms, right? So these are the areas that we take note on their priorities and we set up frameworks to enable them. Now the second part that I think is equally important is to reflect upon our own lending books. All right, it is important before we even jump into the bandwagon saying that hey, we want to achieve net zero by 2050. It is really important for us to understand where our position is today as a bank, all right? Because every bank is different. Every bank is different in terms of the composition of the lending books, in terms of your risk appetite, business appetite is going to be different. So for us as a bank, we have identified 6 key sectors. All right, 2 key ecosystems, which is the energy ecosystem, the built environment, which consists of the construction, right, and which consists of the construction and the real estate, for instance. All right, and we know that these constitute 60% of our lending books, and there's a chance for us to make a difference, make an impact. All right, from engaging our customers and in the footprint that we operate in. So we came up with, based on our understanding, and we came up with frameworks to support the various initiatives of the government. For example, whether it is in terms of green buildings, whether for the likes of Vietnam is for the smart cities, circular economies, And for Vietnam, it's really a very important, trading hub, export hub. So how do we then enable green trade finance? All right, there will be hard-to-abate sectors as well. We don't run away from that. I think the loaded last question I've been asked a lot as well. All right, so how can UOB help our clients, especially in the hard-to-abate sectors? So the very first position, we understand we don't run away from the issue. The concept of sustainability is not just about net zero, not just about that, not just about emission, but rather a very coordinated transition with a good social outcome, a good economic outcome. All right, so as far as the bank is concerned, we do engage our clients and make sure that we provide that relevant support, right? And then it's a win-win-win across both economic transition and as well as social outcomes. Thanks.
Thank you, Jason. And we move from a commercial bank to a multilateral development bank, EIB. Sunita, I would like to ask to chime in on the energy. What are the primary elements of EIB's approach towards transition finance? In particular, how to bring down the cost of capital for energy projects?
Thank you. Thank you for the question, but I'll just build on what Jason just said. Every bank is different. European Investment is an EU bank. It's the bank of the EU Climate Bank. And well, it's a non-profit making institution, so we really support the economic development and sustainability through the climate finance. Just to give you one step back, who are we actually? Because I don't know whether you all know what EIB means, the raison d'être of EIB. EIB is the bank governed by the EU member states, EU-driven bank, and well, our action is really to focus on climate. And also our political leaders has requested EIB to focus on climate because climate is now an issue for everyone. So what we have done in 2019 is we have decided to stop financing fossil fuel. We have all our operations are aligned under the Paris alignment, and we have also committed to finance our, to have our financing dedicated to climate action and environmental by 2030. That is the pledge that the EIB did. This being said, we have already achieved that target I would say a few years ago. So our lending is over 50% into climate action, and we have also pledged to mobilize 1 trillion euros into climate action by 2030. So this is really, it's next door, 2030, but we thought it was really, a leapfrog in our ambitions, but we have already contributed 36 billion euros into climate action last year. So just so as you know, the EIB is the world's largest IFIs in terms of lending and borrowing. Our lending last year was about 74 billion. So if you put this into perspective, what we've done into climate is really a big, big role we are playing worldwide. So what we have done is that we have 4 key elements that we really look into in order to develop the energy transition. First is to unlock energy efficiency, and how do we do that? We just support the project that boosts economy efficiency, cut the energy consumption, and also look at projects that are sustainable and cost efficient, that have low environmental impact, and also encouraging retrofitting industrial upgrades, and also efficient transportation system, as Jason just mentioned. And this is something that you would know, that now we are really going into that field of retrofitting, building cost efficiency and all this. So second is also to decarbonize energy supply. How do we do that? Simply, we just support the project that shift from carbon heavy to clean energy. We promote renewable energy. We are the lead financier in renewable energy finance. around the globe, and we are also aligned with global climate agreements to combat climate change. As I said, EU is the EIB is the EU climate bank, so this is our role, is to really fight climate change. So third is to support innovative technology and new types of energies infrastructure. You would know that nowadays we talk about new technologies. EIB being the non-profit making institution and really support projects that really involves technologies. And very often you wouldn't have a commercial bank that will support these innovative, journey, I would say, because it costs a lot of money. So we are here to support innovation and as well to transfer those knowledge to our other part. And also to, to emphasize on the, on the energy storage. I mean, we all know that, there is, a lot of possibility in Southeast, in Asia and around other regions. The natural resources are here.
Thank you.
The problem,
thank you, Sunita.
Thank you.
I'll try to keep it here, but we're going to continue on this, on the energy, in particular storage is very key. And I will move to another development bank, the World Bank, Ketut. You are a specialist in the financial sector, so I would move from the energy sector to the structural changes of the financial sector. This is because we have seen that there are key challenges contributing to suboptimal mobilization of climate finance in ASEAN. So how to fill these capacity gaps, how to, in reporting and measuring impact. So what do you believe is needed, especially to enhance the participation of commercial institutions?
Thank you, Jando, for the questions. I think from my perspective, I mean, looking at the financial sector as the financiers of all this investment, right? I mean, if you're talking about Vietnam specifically, we have a huge challenge in terms of the financing gap. The World Bank published a report called CCDR, Country Climate Development Report, that provides some estimate on how much investment that is needed to achieve the net zero commitment of Vietnam by 2050. The number was already like a couple of years ago now, 368 billion. That's a net present value. So depending on how you calculate it, and with the cutoff time, the amount of financing needed for Vietnam is huge. Maybe if you do cumulation, it's probably around 700 billion US dollar for the next 20-30 years. And we look at the current capacity of the financial sector to finance this is very limited. We know that public needs to finance it, of course, but public can only finance up to maybe 1/3 of the investment. So the rest needs to come from the private sector. And where the private sector gets the financing? The financial sector. And how much the financial sector? Right now we have, Vietnam has quite a large credit to GDP ratio, around 125% to GDP. That's approximately 500 billion US dollar, but that's already the stock of the credit. So we need to have like more than double that amount just for the green investment. So the challenge is huge. And the green finance itself is a new, I would say, a new theme. Although it's a trendy theme, but we can see that not everybody understands what is needed. Even in terms of the taxonomy itself, what constitutes green projects, there's still not a full clarity. And Vietnam that has not issued the green taxonomy yet. I remember a few years ago in another country, I had a discussion in terms of what type of project that can be included. There are clean, some clear areas, projects, but there are also gray areas. Should we include this as a green project or not? Should we consider it as a green lending or not? So that's a response to your question about the transparency and reporting. Just an example of if you have a production technology that still uses fossil fuel, but you use the fossil fuel in much more efficient way, would you consider it as a green project? or not? And some people say, no, it's still using fossil fuels. We should move away from that. But some people say, yes, I mean, this is a transition. We need to facilitate that. So there's a lot of discussion on this one. I mean, even renewable energy, even hydro, or a big hydro project, if you cut the forest, then it becomes not as green. So, I mean, a lot of discussion, I believe, within each individual or financial institutions to consider, hey, this is good or not. So a lot of building capacity that we need to have, a lot of clarity in terms of regulation, transparency in terms of reporting. And really, I like the example that Jason provided in terms of the roadmap to become a net zero bank from UAB. I think this is a step forward to direction. I mean, just last week we heard BIDV, a Vietnam bank, issued a green bond, which the World Bank helped. I think also GIZ also helped in the early stage. And now, I mean, this is a new thing in Vietnam. I mean, there was another green bond issued last year by EVN Finance, but it was with a guarantee, and this one is pure without guarantee. So there's a new development in this green finance area, which I think we see continuously going forward. But this is just an example of of the big gap that we still have in the financial sector, or in the financing the green transformation. And some of the steps forward where we have seen some of good news that we have seen in the market so far. Let me stop here and then maybe continue with the discussion.
Thank you, Ketut. Thank you for various inputs that we will be developing further. But to try and cover the spectrum here, I would like to go to Mai and to quote a passage of the joint report on multilateral development banks on climate finance that was published last month. Which basically says that in low and middle income countries, only 1% of the total of mitigation, the climate finance, is spent on research development, whereas in high middle countries, high income countries, it's roughly 8%. So we are saying $121 million only for Asia and the Pacific, and all the lower middle income countries. For the high income countries is up to $3 billion. How do we fill this gap? How do we foster new skills needed in this field, such as impact measurement and stakeholders engagement?
There's no path to climate stability without the full participation of the local communities. With my 10 years of background in finance from private equity, I am the transition towards endowment fund. We are also an NGO to help the activities of conservation. And our vision is that we live in harmony with nature and thrive together. And in order for doing that, we need a lot of support in terms of help making the skill of the people to develop and sustain in this transition. So the same concept for Conservation Vietnam was introduced to our partner in Europe, and after several months they actually be able to fundraise up to 2.6 million. And for us in Vietnam, it's a lot more difficult, as in because we are in a lower, because that for all the bankers here with me today, when we make a financial decision, it has to base on a lot of factors. We need, like Jason said, he has to engage his clients, and Sunita is also about the backbones of the Paris alignment agreement. And then so for that, when we translate to the local community, there's a huge gap. Like we pick a person who understands about how climate has changed by being in Mekong Delta River, seeing how the flood has rise year after year, or how we feel the climate change in this world now. We cannot feel it if we are all sitting in air condition, right? But the people who are working at the local level, they can see it every day. And for your question, how are we able to bring in the knowledge? We do the knowledge sharing to the local communities to have this perspective. And then from the finance sector, the people in finance can understand that and can join in the decision making. It takes the fostering of open-minded culture where leaders are inclusive and taking the response from not only the high-level management but also the people who are working on the ground. And it takes collaboration not only within a country, especially in Vietnam. We are in the lower income economy, so it takes international collaborations. And for conservation, we need to do that because biodiversity is a new concept that will be introduced after net zero. And again, if no collaboration with the local community, we cannot make our way to climate stability.
Thank you, Mai. Going to Mr. Hui from Monre. The gap in financing is quite stark. We know that to deliver net zero, we would require $6 trillion being spent every year, and we are not even passing the mark of 1 trillion as of now. And I would like to better understand your views of the international cooperation and the implementation of the Paris Agreement, your decision to whether to take the route of the just energy transition partnerships that have been developed around the world, or what you believe to be the top priority for the government.
Thank you. First of all, good morning, and thank you, Urachan, for the opportunity to be here and share with you. The first question Jason asked me this morning is, where is the government's priority? So it seems like everybody is concerned about what would be priority for the government. And at the moment, I quite frankly say that, well, we don't know yet. We don't know yet. Because there's everything within that energy transition is, for Vietnam at the moment, is priority. And first of all, that while we have the PDP-8 and our partner next door is talking about it right now, and there's all the projects listed in the PDP-8 would be our priority, and if that to say. And there's so many others documents and which has a list of projects or work programs coming with it. For example, the strategy on climate change, the strategy on green growth. So all of those instructions, all of those Prime Minister decisions are our priorities, I would say. But priority to what? And if we talk about what we're talking about today in terms of climate and transition, then let me take an example for the JETP that we are working on. And JETP, that we are only the third country in the world after South Africa and Indonesia working on a JETP. And nobody actually understood what JETP is supposed to be, especially the just part of it. And we always say that, well, and then people come and the banks and the international organizations and NGOs and people are talking and asking the government, what is, again, your priority to put on JETP? And currently that we're working on the RMP with a list of more than 200 investment projects, about more than 150 capacity building and technical assistance projects. And quite frankly, that we can't say that any of those is more priority than others, because they're all priorities to us, especially when it comes to just part of it. And because it's just part of it that, well, there isn't any formula to ensure that everything that, well, within energy transition is just in every project. Every project is different. And I would like to echo what Mai say, that well, we need to look at specifically in any region, any areas, any project site to ensure that, well, to make sure that, well, everything is just. That means that, well, it is pretty tough for us to do so. So, but anyway, I need to give you an answer. From our position is that, okay, Vietnam is already committed to net zero. So we need to peak by 2035, and we need to get to net zero by 2050. But by 2050 is at maximum that we can emit from all sectors, including energy, is 110 million tons of CO2. And we have to absorb from our forests and from our CCUS or whatever projects that we can do to absorb CO2. Again, 110 million CO2, million tons of CO2. So that means that, well, if you're looking at it from the GHG emission point of view, then everything that can reduce GHG emission and at the same time got the co-benefits to the people, to the community, are our priority. So that is what we will say so, because we committed already, so now we need to act. And that is the basis for us to act on. And of course, we can go into more specific, but probably for later. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Huy. Moving to GIZ, Dennis. Both panelists here, the last two, have touched upon how to bring the climate targets into mainstream, both in national planning and in society. So my question to you is how to support the oversight of mechanisms among government agencies, and how can Vietnam leverage some of its tools, being fiscal capacity, subsidies, taxes, to attract the private sector for climate action?
Yeah, thank you very much. As GIZ, we are working on behalf of the German government for this green and climate finance topic for several years here in Vietnam. And I want to share some following the question here about our observations where we stay here regarding the framework, the opportunities and challenges regarding to attract private investments in the, let's say, climate relevant sectors in the country. First, the framework, and my colleagues here from the panel shared it already. The framework from political governmental side, it's very positive in the sense of the commitments done by Vietnam, and also in financial reform there are a lot of activities already ongoing. Some of like the green taxonomy for green credits and green bonds we have been working with the government was already mentioned here. So there are things on the way to address net zero, the green growth strategy, and what just from Monroe mentioned also the JETP. On the other hand, on investors' side, I had a look on the preparation for this event here, and I find out that an actual Morgan Stanley survey made the number that 84% of global asset owners are integrating sustainable investing into their investment process or are actively considering doing so. So it seems to be that there is also a positive framework from the investor side to go into these sectors. So the framework is well, and if we go to my second point, if we know the framework, there are also some challenges, some barriers to overcome, to combine the investment to the relevant sectors, and also to provide to the private investments friendly conditions to do that in an environment which is also somehow competitive for Vietnam and other countries. First, I think it's very important to make a good analysis about cost and benefits of these investments. The green taxonomy was already mentioned. There are people working on that. That's the framework, but it's more than that. At the end, to make a good analysis about cost and benefits, we need the correct and actualized data. This is something which is on work. And on the other hand, we need also to combine the priorities of the government, the priorities of the investments, and the totally different situation in the climate relevant sectors. From my side, I would also to advise to look on the both sides, and it was already mentioned here, climate change and with that climate finance is not only about mitigation. It's also about to combine the adaptation where a lot of potential for investments regarding, for example, urban infrastructure or other things are really relevant for that. Because this will also attract different sides from the financial sector if we make this a little bit wider. And also to integrate beside, let's say, the climate way and the economic way, from GSZ side we totally support the idea that the social impact of these investments must somehow be considered. And I think this is also what in Vietnam is being discussed and somehow needs to be considered, the social dimension of combining economic growth with climate change. Seeing that, it's very important and needs to be developed that there are planned and developed bankable and fiscally sustainable projects on the desk for the investors. And if we have these things, good framework, good cost-benefit analysis, and the projects considering the five dimension, environmentally, social, and economic, then we can go to see where the incentives and subsidies can come. One example is, you may know that in Germany the government introduced such kind of a mechanism to promote electromobility for both sides, for enterprises, but also for the public. But at the end, Vietnam will need his own solutions for that. To combine green bonds, for example, with tax incentive is something also to consider. But also in the preparation for this event, we had a look in our last activities, and I think if we go into the tax incentives, we must also consider the introduction of the upcoming global minimum tax, which has opportunities but also challenges about regarding providing tax incentives for investors to go into climate change, which from our point of view we are still on the beginning to analyze, but it's something what from GIZ side with our partners we want to develop in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Dennis. Many points and complex answer here. I would like now to ask any of you to take this question. We said that there are many moving parts in the solutions that are being prepared for the transition, but these are long-term efforts. The taxation system is not something you change in a year, and the capacity to train people and the modification of how economic activities are classified, the taxonomy just mentioned. One of the solutions that is being discussed very often is the case of blended finance, where philanthropic capital and public capital helps private investors to reduce their risk perception and make projects bankable. So what is the role of blended finance as a short-term solution until we have more defined long-term solution capable to delivering on our problems? Jason?
Yeah, maybe I can share a little bit of our real experience working with World Bank, right, IFC wing regarding the blended finance. So I think on paper, right, on theory, I think blended finance would be able to augment, number one, the risk profile of a project. Second, in terms of the cost of funds from the bank's perspective. So these are wonderful approach, right, to make a project may seem risky and become bankable. But as we implement some of the pilot with IFC in terms of supporting some of the energy efficiency projects in Vietnam, we also noted that that blended finance framework alone has lots of challenges that comes with it, especially in the cost of funds framework that the bank is facing with. All right, and we would like to see a little bit more how the philanthropic funds, public funds, is going to come together to blend in with our commercial banks' funding as well to make projects workable. Maybe Katuk, you have some views on this as well?
Thank you. You put me on the spot, but that's okay. Well, the way I see the blended finance, all finance that we are doing already blended. I mean, just on the basics, back to basics. Because if you have project, you have equity, you have debt. That's already blended, right? And why you do that? Because you have a different risk profile and different, expected return and so on. But having those only two types of risk and return, I would say, scheme, it's not enough, because there are risks that the lender cannot take, but for the equity holder, it's like probably also too much. So that's why we have the mezzanine finance. You have the partial guarantee. You have the first loss stake and things like that, right? And then you mentioned about philanthropies and so on. I mean, I see blended finance not just a short-term solution. This is a long-term solution, because we're already doing it. So all this type of thing is just to fine-tune what type of risks that a particular financiers are willing to take, and what type of return that they are capable to or they want to take as well. So this it certainly requires a lot of fine-tuning, right? Because different projects have different risk profiles, different investors, international investors and domestic investors, even if they are the same investor, type of investor like banks, they have different risk appetite. So it's just a matter of that. And also government, I think I see right now, perhaps some government, probably Vietnam included, this either take this project funded by the government or give it to private sector. Not either, because there are ways, and we learned it from the the world kind of a PPP concept. There are types of risk sharing that the government may be able to provide to reduce the risk and obviously the return, but then to fit the expectation and the appetite of the investors, viability gap, payment, availability payment, those type of thing, also partial guarantee and so political guarantee, also something that the World Bank Group, our sister institution MIGA, can provide, and so on and so forth. So it just needs some kind of a discussion in terms of refining that, and also the appetite from both the private sector and the public sector in terms of accepting this type of solutions.
Thanks, Katuk. I know he's an expert, so he can take my question.
Okay, may I add a little bit more? So for my background, I actually have the experience with the PPP model, and it's the most difficult part about it is that the gap between the private sector and the public sector, the frameworks, the legal framework is not there yet. So when we actually go into the operation, there are many parts that we could not overcome. So from that experience in PPP model, I moved to my next step here as Conservation Vietnam, which is a philanthropic endowment fund, where the profit will not go back to anybody, but the cost, which is conservation for Vietnam, toward the environment and biodiversity. So far, we've been taking our very small steps to explore what it's like, and I find that in market in Asia in general and in Vietnam, we have in depth our culture is a giving culture. People are very willing to give, because when you reach a certain point of prosperity, like Vietnam right now, it is an unthinkable abundance of economy that we could not think like 30 years ago when I was born. Basically, right now, my parents could not imagine how far I have come in terms of being a successful business, or having the status in the society, having the equal opportunity, and getting the support from my dear husband, who is here today, is also supporting me. And he's a successful man from Hanoi, willing to support his woman to do things that could help others, not only for the economy, but social economy. So I believe that the philanthropy plays a very important role in this economy. And we also know that for the unpaid economy, like the woman at home doing the household work, for the male to go, for her husband to go to work or to do any of the economy contribution, if we were gonna pay for that, the economy gonna collapse. Because the work at home who is not paying paid actually is the work that building the local communities. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you for this very powerful sharing. Yes, I would say this is the real economy, not the one of the charts. So I think it's where we're going. Taxonomy will readjust also the pricing of economic activities in this direction. And it's very powerful what you just said. And you touched also on some of the challenges, though. You touched upon regulation challenges, and country-level partnerships are needed, collaborations are needed. And we are seeing a burgeoning development of initiatives. And sometimes people don't even have the span of attention to follow so many. So my question again to all of you, whoever wants to take them, considering you have incredibly high vantage points on many initiatives, is can you share some of the successful ones that you have witnessed in the past years, and the key success factors for these partnerships, collaborations to deliver on climate finance? Dennis.
I thank you. I would shortly start. It comes to my mind one example from our own corporation, but there are also another examples from other organizations similar to us here in Vietnam. We just spoke about the timing when these things will change the economy. Some things needs to be changed quick, and some decision will have impact on medium and long term, where we really have to consider that we don't know 100% what will happen. I think in green finance that's well known, this condition, because you change a small thing and we have 10 impacts, but we only know 5 from them. So our experience is that this cannot be done easily with 3 or 4 years time frame projects. This is in these points is too short, because the development of Vietnam, yesterday we celebrated 30 years of cooperation in economic and finance of the German corporation. So 30 years it's the base, and that's maybe one of the examples, because so at the end I have information gathering and sharing also to the colleagues who are working on that about the 30 years of development of Vietnamese economy and finance structure. And this is very helpful for these partnerships on country level. It becomes challenging if you just jump in for a short term, especially regarding in green investments, because as I said in my first introduction, you need to know the framework, the cost, the benefit and cost analysis and all that. So I would say that where possible, and a lot of actors are doing is really to establish long-standing, trustful cooperation base, so that we can really develop something in green and climate finance on the longer run, that these 3 or 4 years, considering that emerging countries, and I have long experience with them, like Vietnam, are changing a little bit quicker in that sense than my own home country, Germany, for example. Thank you.
Thank you, Dennis. I would like to open the floor for one question after listening for the first part of the discussion. We've touched upon many, many topics. Is there anybody who wants to ask? Yes. The microphone is coming here. If you can introduce yourself, please.
Hello, my name is Amalia Gux. I'm an independent management consultant. Sorry, I came here from Ho Chi Minh, and I would like to address a question to Jason. I was thinking, regarding the financing, for example, in UOB, but also I'm interested in other banks, especially in Vietnam. When we finance investment, or it can be consumer, it can be corporate, is there a green scoring or a social scoring that you are having, or that the banks are planning to have soon? I'm interested on this green scoring information, which I think it is coming or it will come soon. Yes, thank you.
Yeah, I think thanks, Tamalia, for the very relevant question. So in fact, when I first mentioned about, it is important to design frameworks and solutions that caters to either the individual or the corporates that you mentioned, right, in their green activities. So when I mention about framework, what do I mean by that? It is a set of credit parameters that is relevant for the particular green activity or the sector that they operate in, all right? Or it's in terms of the sustainability targets that we actually preset for our customers, all right, which they can select from, things that are material to each of the sector, and use as a basis for measurement of the sustainable outcome over the duration of the loans, all right? So definitely, like we mentioned, this is the very onset, a very first step that we did to make sure that the solutions that we design is holistic, end-to-end. Covers credit, covers measurement, covers the pricing of the loans, right, to make it really motivating for our customers.
So it is rather a green impact of the project rather than a green scoring of the company.
Okay, so definitely there is a blend of the ESG score of the corporate customers. That is one factor. All right, but other than that, that is also very important to address the issues of greenwashing as well, which is very real. And UOB as a bank, we stand firm in making sure that as we track the progress or the disbursements of the loans, it must be used for a green purpose. All right, so to your question, it's a blend of the two. ESG scoring for the corporate, we take it very seriously. That shapes our price, our premium, all right, our risk premium. Second part of it, ongoing basis, we track their performance, and we actually have a leeway to adjust our pricing based on their sustainability performance. So it's a win-win outcome for both the economy and the customers and the bank.
Thank you, Jason.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jason. First, Hui, please, if you want to comment, and then there is a question in the back after.
Yeah, that's quite an interesting topic that Amelia brought up here. What you call it taxonomy, you call it criteria, you call it priority, you call it scoring, whatever. But there's a system already exists in the companies, in the corporate world. It's ESG. And in Vietnam now, just recently that I met with MSB and some other banks that got cooperation with my department. And they all talked about the ESG in corporate world now, and to be able to understand how that company or any particular projects that they are doing worth lending or worth providing some sort of finance for the banking system within Vietnam at the moment. But unfortunately, for Vietnam, we got roughly about 900,000 companies, but only 5% of them are big companies, corporations, that they've been doing ESG properly. And for the majority of them that do not understand what ESG is. And the most complicated or the full ESG criteria is probably the SP 500. And even the banking system now do not understand how to apply that SP 500 criteria to all the projects. Yeah, so many banks in Vietnam, even the big four, are now sitting together and talking about the set of criteria, green, for green projects. But it's very difficult. And in terms of taxonomy, which we briefly mentioned this morning, that while we don't know yet if that is the work that my Ministry of Natural Resources and Environment is supposed to develop, or the Ministry of Finance, or Ministry of Planning and Investment. But I don't think that, it's the job the government should do, because it very much depends on the financial sector and also the corporate world to work together and agree upon a particular set of criteria before we can call it green projects. And another point is that we talked about a blended finance, that which is very complicated and sophisticated word for the companies. But I agree with Dennis, everything is already blended finance. And even within a single source of finance for example, public sector, is already blended. Depending on how is that governed, what law is governed that particular fund, particular finance flows into the company. And it goes through different things. It comes from different sources within the government, within the public sector, and it's already blended. And each of them would have a different set of criteria, which is some part of it very similar to ESE. So that is quite a complicated issue that we're talking about here. But the key thing is, well, whatever it is good for the community, is good for the energy transition process, then we call it worth lending, worth providing finance. Thank you.
Thank you, Hui. I would like to introduce our seventh panelist, Ms. Maria Joao Pateguana, Principal Private Sector Development Specialist of the Asian Development Bank. And I would like to come straight to you, asking how to scale up transition finance, considering the challenges that we have listened from the panelists today.
Good morning. Thanks for the introduction, and I'm glad to join this last bit. So because I come last, I'll probably summarize some of the points and ask some more provocative questions, perhaps. I think we are here to discuss climate finance and transition finance, because the debate has evolved quite tremendously over the last year. So in the beginning it was all about exclusion, divestment. We then realized that it doesn't solve the problem alone. I think our understanding of better solutions also evolved. And one important point to note is that the climate solutions themselves are moving from being just green to including transition finance. So when we think about scaling up, the idea is to mobilize finance for the purposes of energy, of transition, because the requirements are massive, right? So if we zoom into Vietnam, and if we look at the electricity system in particular, and we look at initiatives like JETP, the capital requirements over the next 3 to 5 years are north of 15 billion, right? So the critical element for governments, for stakeholders, and for government of Vietnam in particular, is to mobilize capital. And it has to mobilize capital now to mitigate, otherwise there will be a risk, a transition risk, and a physical risk as a result. So as we set targets for investing in climate finance, it's important to include decarbonization plans in those decarbonization capital requirements in those plans, otherwise we won't meet the desired outcome. So I think my point is basically we shouldn't put so much pressure on financial institutions, private and public, not to invest in lesser greener activities. I think mobilization is the key, but scaling up means including the decarbonization plans, including mobilizing capital. There's no good or bad capital. Yes, one has to think about greenwashing and science-based data, but ultimately it's mobilizing capital and allowing institutions also to support the brown sector, otherwise transition won't happen. So I'll probably stop here.
Thank you. It's very good. Please, Sunita.
Well, I think that a lot of points has been touched. You were talking about the successful story. I'm not going to go previously, but I just take something that is really topical. On the just energy transition, for example, EIB has pledged 1 billion euros for South Africa, and it was not a walk in the park, as you might know, because of all the challenges you mentioned. It was there, but we are learning. And also we have pledged for 1 billion Indonesia, which is as well not very easy, but we are getting there. And last week we have pledged as well 500 million with Vietnam on the JETP also. So I think what I'm trying to say is that, of course, what you're saying is capital, I don't think a lot of people say there's a funding missing, there's a funding gap. But I think we have to look at the global picture. It's not only about finance, it's about a collective effort, and it's not only the government. You have to have the society at large. You have the industry who has to buy in. You have the international partnership that has to also help, and the industry, NGOs. All this has to come together. It's not only one person or one institution that can change all this. It has to be a collective effort from all sides. And that is the most important thing. Once this is there, you have the buy-in of all those different actors, then we can talk about what else to look. How do we go to the project? Identify the projects. There is resources, but you identify the needs, and you see whether it, of course, satisfy the needs of the country, whether they are able to deliver. So that is the thing that you need to go. And then afterwards, as you all mentioned, blended finance. I mean, as World Bank was mentioning, by default, it is already blended. I mean, as I said before, EIB's fund, we are non-profit making, it's already without making a profit. So it's already concessional loan. And what we do as well, we mobilize grants from the EU and also from the DFI. So, I mean, we have as well initiative with GIZ, on, how to blend our cheaper loan also in order to help to kick up the projects.
Thank you, Sunita. It seems to me that there is one fil rouge, trait d'union, I don't know in English. It's basically something that is putting us all in common, which is the complexity of the problem. And unfortunately, having too complex solutions sometimes is not really the best way to go. From the bank perspective, how transition and physical risks are embedded in the investment decision-making process, I guess. The credit department, the legal department, whoever takes the data from the companies, they need to start working together on realms that they weren't capable of doing in the past. Same as probably in the public sector, I suppose, talking to the Ministry of Finance and MYT and MONRE, different spheres of jurisdiction, the coordination is quite complex. So how can we simplify this? What is the recipe to create incentives even inside our own organizations to simplify and streamline processes and come up with simpler solutions, if possible? Is it an impossible question?
Yeah, I can start again very short. What first comes in my mind, it's the combination. If it's complex, it's very difficult to simplify, because if we simplify, then we come to this phenomena that then we cannot manage the impacts. My invitation would be also for the companies, but both for public sector, there is no other solution than to manage the complexity well. The complexity will not go away by simplifying that, especially not in climate finance issue. And the second one, which is not only a Vietnam issue, it's also a German issue and maybe other countries, is really also the combination about to look, if you want to simplify thinking, is to see which kind of administration and bureaucracy do we need in these things, and to continuously have a critical look how this is developing. Because if not, on the one hand, we are increasing the number of requirements for the business, and this, on the other hand, can a negative impact on how businesses will be act. On the other hand, we need some regulations, but also incentives, both from my point of view, to handle that. Yeah, and I think to simplify some of these procedures, there is potential, and one of the reasons for this potential is the digital transformation, which is another trend which is ongoing on behind the challenge of climate change. Thank you.
May I echo on that? And I totally agree with the digital transformation, and technology has been developed so well that I recently found that the job I have been learning for the last 10 years doing finance by making the Excel spreadsheet and putting formula into it it has been replaced by technology. Like nowadays, people who have no finance background can just plug in numbers and they go the whole model for them. So they basically did not have to go through what I had go through in the past 10 years, learning to be a finance person. And so in that, I believe that we need to foster the workplace, the community with innovation and open-minded culture that people can have the freedom to speak up or to empower themselves and to take action for the good cause that they believe in. And I'm sure we all here to share the value of love and harmony in our whatever we do. We want the best for our planet and for our future, which are our children. And I have two at home, so I'm here for them.
Thank you. Thank you.
Sorry, Zendo. I just want to add on to the complexity instead of simplifying it. I'm sorry about that. But I think within the financial sector, right, other than the cost of fund, the structure of the whole project, from within the financial sector or within the organization, there is also a competing interest, all right? So for example, Vietnam is going to embark on a Basel journey, all right? So which means to say we have to risk-weight all our assets and set aside funds, right, to cushion against the downfall. So how do we then resolve the conflict of interest over here? How do we then promote and kind of encourage the banking sector to take on more green loans, all right, rather than having the other dimension of wanting to meet the Basel requirement? So something for Hui to talk about.
Yeah, I think to simplify it, first of all, we need to know where to simplify. From public sector, I think the issue is about disclosure and compliance. That's what we need to look at. And from the financial sector, I think it's due diligence and risk assessment. So those two things are quite, in many cases, are quite conflicting to each other. And first of all, from my point of view, that, well, line ministries in Vietnam at the moment are working very hard trying to make compliance as easy as possible for the corporate world. And especially, for example, but the disclosure thing is something that we need to work on, because it's very much related to the legal foundation that we are working on with the corporate world at the moment. For example, at the moment, I got tons and tons of data coming from companies under the Prime Minister decision that who has to report on their GHG emission. I can't disclose any single piece of them at all. Yeah, so that, well, if the banking sector coming and ask us for it, we can't give them that. We can't at all, even though we know that how meaningful that it would be to your due diligence process and risk assessment. So you have to come to an agreement amongst the private sector, the financial sector and public sector on that things to simplify it first. Because that's probably the first step for any lending or financing process.
Thank you. I would like to ask a note from you, Maria, again, before coming back to the floor. There was one question at the back, and please, if there are others, raise your hand and you will receive the mic. If you would want to add a note on, in particular, how do we use this collective effort to, in particular, solve the energy transition challenges in Vietnam?
So I would perhaps highlight one initiative, which is the ADB Energy Transition Mechanism. For those of you who are not familiar, this was an initiative that ADB launched at COP26. So basically we step back and look at looking at the electricity system or the power sector, which accounts for roughly 50% of emissions, and has the potential to, if we solve the electricity system, then we unlock decarbonization issues and opportunities in other sectors. So we look at the highest emitting asset, which is coal-fired power plants. And so the initiative is basically to use concessional funds, public funds, private funds, to basically incentivize the early retirement of coal-fired power plants or intensive carbon generating technologies, or repurposing those assets. So the initiative, it's challenging, and Vietnam is one of the pilot countries. So this is an initiative already piloted in Indonesia, Philippines, and in the meantime, other countries have joined. Vietnam is one of them, Pakistan, and recently Kazakhstan. So ADB has taken the leadership of documenting how do we ensure energy security and at the same time reduce emissions. It's not an easy task. I think that the challenge there is how do we set up in a quality manner precedents for future transactions. And beyond that, how do we also ensure that we achieve just transition? Because there are livelihoods, there are communities who are affected and livelihoods that are affected by this transition. So how do we best serve these communities? It's work in progress. I think the challenge is to look at risk allocation, to look at the power purchase agreements. How do we incentivize, how do we blend and use climate finance or concessional funds to optimize or incentivize early retirement? But it's one of the initiatives within the Vietnam context to scale up and expand the decarbonization efforts.
Thank you. There was a question, please.
Yes, thank you. I'm Zhang. I'm from Swiss Corporation Office. Thanks a lot for the panel and sharing from the regulatory perspective as well as from business community. I do have two basic questions for the panel, but also for the business community as well. So first of all, we all agree that for Vietnam to honor its commitment as COP26 on climate and transition finance, the demand is enormous, right? So the public resource is not enough. It needs to crowd in the private investment as well. But what should be the right mechanism, the right channel? So here it boils down to two things. First, whatever we invest, we need to have a thing to be verified, that this is green investment. And then, at the end of the day, it is a green taxonomy. And it takes quite some time for Vietnam to come up with green taxonomy. To my understanding, it is not yet available. Where international market, it is on there. So my question for investors here, whether or not this market now is ready to adopt international green taxonomy, so that at the end of the day, we can all kind of commingle or harmonize international investor requirements as well as domestic investors' requirement. So my first question on the readiness to go for green taxonomy and reduce administrative procedure, right? So that's my first question. My second question, again, boils down to the source of funding, public-private partnership mechanism. And we all understand that for investment in the climate change project, it is part of that, it is for the public return, part of that for private return. So for the public return, yes, it makes sense that the public resource should put in, right? But then what should be the optimal threshold? What should be the optimal for public resource to share the cost of such respective investment? Then it requires a cost and benefit analysis ex ante, a proper one, and transparency system. And whether or not Vietnam has this system in place now, that's my question. And again, as Dennis said, that investment for climate transition finance, it is a matter of urgency. And we have only some 20 years ago. Do we need to invest for that by all means? Or we need to have a fundamental reform in order to have foundation in place first? Otherwise, public resource might be lost for the title or the so-called as a climate finance. When transparency is not in place, when proper cost benefits ex ante is not yet properly adopted. Thank you.
Thank you. Maybe I can just touch on the verification. One way that I have seen quite effective is in Singapore, the monetary authority has created a loan grant scheme to up to 125 Singapore dollars to cover for verification costs for green finance. I think to incentivize borrowers to access this type of products. The rest, I leave it to you specialists in the field. Dennis, yeah?
Very, very short, because we know each other from the Swiss and German cooperation. I want to, unfortunately, regarding the green taxonomies, I want to add something which we need to consider, because I have the feeling, yes, it's important to have that kind of framework, but what we are also observing is that on different levels and in different stages worldwide, there are being developed a lot of them. And this is because we had it about the complexity, so we are increasing the complexity again on that side. So I think it's important to do that, but we must also find a regional or international coordination mechanism for that framework.
I think the next panel is about taxonomy, so let's keep it on climate finance for now here, okay? It's going to be interesting later. Please.
Can I respond just quickly? Certainly taxonomy is important, and having Vietnam taxonomy is also useful, but it doesn't prevent business community to actually use the international taxonomy to raise financing. And then we did BIDV, with its green bonds, using a standard from the ICMA, so it can still be used. I would like to also respond to the second question with respect to this, financing, which one goes to the public sector, which one goes to the private sector. I guess, in principle, when we look at all these priority projects, now it depends on, like Mr. Hui mentioned, everything is priorities, right? So let's see the financial returns of this project. The highest financial return, give it to the private sector, because the private sector is willing to take it. They can take the risk because the return is high. Up to a certain point, the private sector will not take it, right? That's we use to blended finance, some risk sharing and so on. But there are a point where any financial return, because it's so low, would not be taken by the private sector. And that's where the public sector comes in. So, and then we have to look at the economic return of these projects, which ones give to, even though financial return may be not high, but economic return may be high with all this, social projects and so on. That's where the biggest priority for the public sector to put in the money. Because otherwise, if the government just pick all the projects with different returns, the cost of fund for the government is actually the same, which is the cost of public debt, right? So that doesn't match with the risk and return profile of the project. So this is, I think, this type of analysis needs to be done in order to decide, okay, this project goes to the private sector, this project is taken by the public, and this project will require some kind of a blended finance.
Please, Jason, and then the last question.
Okay, can I very quickly answer to Young's question on the readiness for Vietnam? So, we have made the commitment that we will be net zero by 2050. That's our pledge. So rather than saying whether we are ready or not, I think the very critical thinking is about whether did we start too late. All right, if the consensus is that, we risk starting too late, then now is the starting point and let's run towards it. And blending in with the right mechanism, learning from the other jurisdiction, their journey is very important to help Vietnam along. All right, whether it's in the form of taxonomy, whether it's in the form of a cross-ministerial policy, how Monterey is going to interface with MOIT, all right, to bring about the best combination and the best outcome. Right, mixing water, energy, food, resources, mix them in the right formula, get the right outcome. I think that will help Vietnam get to the position and the pledge. Thanks.
Thank you, Jason. It's actually a good wrap up. Is there another question? Yes.
Good morning, Mark from SMB, Netherlands Development Organization. We hear a lot of pledge and investments coming on, but most of them are like linked to loans for the private sector, which is fine. But we usually find that these are like for, let's say, specific investments in a physical boundary of a specific technology, right? But there's a whole system around that investment that requires to be changed, right? And this requires investment. And then when it comes this, let's say, the extended blended finance, when the philanthropic funding comes in, to actually help organizations to help to change that system around, to ensure the supply and to ensure the sale of that, let's say, whatever product they are doing, right? So my question is, what can be done better from these pledges from governments, from development banks, multilateral banks, to actually not only focusing on providing loans to private sector for that specific boundary, physical boundary, but also to support the change of the whole system around that, to make sure that this investment can actually work. Because in many cases, the private sector is saying, yes, we have the money, we have the technology, but there's a lot of systems around, like behavior change, like supply, the market that are required to be changed, right? And only with that investment or this loan to the private sector, it cannot be changed. So what can be done better by the development sector?
I'm not a development, so I cannot answer.
Maybe I do not have the answer for it, but I'm from the panel and from the question, I see that we are getting somewhere, and maybe we're almost there. Maybe we need to just keep our mind open and more collective work in order to foster innovation. Because like in this time of technology and the commitments from the government, from the public sector and the private sector, maybe we are almost to find the solution, and that's what conservation we are also searching for. Maybe we need to take that risk to see where there's a sunk fallacy cost, and we agree that with a certain amount of finance, we're going to accept that and see that this did not work. So then we move on to the next project with the learning from the previous one, and with the experience and from the expert, like 10 people good at what they're doing. One person can be wrong, but 10 people, maybe someone will have the answer.
Thank you, Mai, and I would let Ketut close the panel.
Well, no, because the question is very loaded, right? Because we're talking about the old environment. So which part of that? So we can only address where we are working on, right? So let me just, coming from the financial sector, and I want also to kind of connect that with the previous question, right? From the financial sector, what do we need to do? I mean, not so much focus on the climate finance and the green finance. So we have a lot of agenda to improve in the financial sector, the banking sector. Yeah, we need to clean up the banking sector. All this, NPL problems, unresolved, viable banks, right? We need to clean those up. We need to complete the transition into a modern banking system, including change and legal framework for the banking. We need to recapitalize the banks because we need to have a bigger funding sources for the financing need that we have. We need to develop the non-bank financial sector, the capital markets. We need to improve the institutional capital base in Vietnam, mobilize financing from individuals and from households into into capital markets, into green finance on this. And we have to also mobilize international investors. And there are two things that can be done, which is not simple, but if it's done, it would attract a lot of international investors. Number one is to increase or to get Vietnam upgraded into investment grade category, right? Vietnam is still 1 or 2 notches below the investment grade. If Vietnam can improve to the next investment grade, then it will flow, it will invite a lot of capital flow into the country, which can be channeled for the green investment or the climate transitions, which financing need is so huge. Secondly, to make Vietnam get into the emerging market category. I don't know whether people know that Vietnam is still in the frontier market. It's not yet in the emerging market, surprisingly. So bringing Vietnam into this category and a lot of reforms that needs to be done there would attract a lot of financing. Not just for the climate, but certainly when we have a bigger pool of financing, then the channel for this financing into the green and the climate finance will be bigger, considering that a lot of other efforts that is taken to get there. So maybe that's just my
I think this is a perfect end. Big applause to all the panel in the room.